I was scrolling through my feed this morning, and I swear every third post is someone in like a galvanized steel tub.
Oh, yeah, the grimace.
Yes, the grimace, veins popping, but the caption is always something just incredibly profound, conquering the mind, unleashing the warrior within, hashtag grind.
It has absolutely become the modern badge of honor, hasn't it?
Yeah.
It's like, if you aren't freezing yourself into a state of shock before 6 a.m., are you even trying?
Exactly. It feels like if I'm not shivering, I'm failing. But that cultural obsession, that whole harder is better idea, is exactly why we need to talk about the document on the desk today.
Yeah.
Because this isn't just another top 10 benefits of ice bath article.
No, not even close. This is a document titled Cold Exposure, Fasting, Austerity, and the State Beyond Practice. And I have to say, for anyone listening who loves their morning plunge or, who really identifies with that warrior mindset, this this might be a bit of a reality check.
A reality check is putting it mildly. This analysis basically takes a sledgehammer to the spiritual glorification of these practices.
Right.
It's like, hey, stop talking about your spirit animal and let's look at your nervous system.
Which is so refreshing.
Yeah.
The mission of this deep dive is really to strip away all that narrative and look strictly at the neural dynamics, the physiological rhythms.
Yeah.
We're not here to talk about building character.
No.
We're here to talk about mechanism.
And the mechanism is, well, really surprising. The core premise here is that cold exposure isn't actually a technique for calming the mind.
Which is what everyone claims.
It's what everyone claims. But it's a way to forcibly stop the mind from working.
Right. And maybe even more controversially, the source argues that the ultimate goal isn't to get good at enduring pain. The goal is to reach a state where the cold becomes completely irrelevant.
That distinction between enduring something and it being irrelevant, that is the thread I really want to pull on today. But before we get to the philosophy, we have to start with the brain. Because every influencer I follow claims the cold gives them mental clarity. They say, I get in the ice and my mind just goes silent. But this source argues that's a total misunderstanding of what's actually happening upstairs.
It is. It argues that what people are calling clarity is actually a misinterpretation of a biological override. To understand this, we have to get a little technical and look at the reticular activating system, or the RAS.
Okay, let's unpack the RAS. That's the filter, right? The thing that decides what I pay attention to.
Exactly. It's the gatekeeper. Your brain is constantly bombarded with sensory data sounds, lights, the feeling of your clothes, the temperature of the room. The RAS decides what's important enough to send up to your conscious mind.
Okay.
Now, think about what happens when you plunge your body into 40-degree water.
Panic. Just absolute panic.
Biological panic. That is a massive life-threatening signal from your periphery, your skin screaming straight to your central nervous system. It creates a peripheral to central sensory input that is so overwhelming, it effectively hijacks the RAS. It's like a denial of service attack on your brain's bandwidth.
So when I feel that silence, it's not that I've reached some Zen state of inner peace.
No.
It's that my brain is just screaming, IT is cold, so loud that it can't hear my grocery list anymore.
That is precisely it. The source uses a very specific term here: preemption. It argues that cold exposure doesn't suppress the default mode network.
And that's the brain circuit for our internal monologue, the worrying, the planning.
That's the one. It doesn't suppress it, it preempts it. It forcefully occupies your attention with overwhelming bodily input.
Wow. Okay, that is a huge distinction. Because suppression implies you've gained some kind of control over the noise.
Right.
Preemption just implies you're drowning it out with a louder noise.
Precisely. The clarity people feel is actually forced attentional occupation.
Yeah.
Your brain literally cannot process abstract thoughts because it's 100% allocated to processing the temperature shock. It's a hardware interrupt, not a software optimization. You aren't meditating, you're just overloaded.
It's like when your computer freezes and you just hold down the power button. You didn't fix the software glitch, you just forced a reboot.
That is the perfect analogy. And that leads us directly into the physiology. Because if the brain is being hijacked, the body is undergoing a massive shift to handle it. This is where the source gets fascinating about blood rhythm. We usually just hear, oh, it improves circulation, which is pretty vague.
Yeah, vascular health is the go-to buzzword. But the document calls it a phase reset of blood flow rhythm. What does that actually mean?
Well, think of your circulatory system less like plumbing and more like a musical rhythm.
Okay.
When you're stressed or anxious or just living a modern sedentary life, that rhythm is often chaotic. Your breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, they aren't all talking to each other efficiently. You're out of sync.
So the system is just noisy, the instruments aren't playing together.
Exactly. The cold shock forces a temporary synchronization. To survive the cold, the body triggers massive vasoconstriction. It clamps down on all the blood vessels in your arms and legs to shove blood into the core to keep your organs warm.
A survival reflex. Squeeze everything to the middle to stay alive.
But here is where the source provides a critical detail that I think most people, even seasoned ice bathers, are getting wrong. It outlines a specific protocol.
What's that?
It's about the sequence of temperature. It calls for warm first, cold after.
Warm first. See, now that's interesting because I see a lot of people doing the opposite. They jump in the cold to wake up, then hit a warm shower to thaw out.
Or they do contrast therapy, right? Sauna, ice, and then finish in the sauna because it feels nice.
Yes, exactly.
And the source warns heavily against that specific sequence. Going from cold to warm is the final step.
Really? Why is ending on warm a problem?
I thought the contrast was the whole point. It comes down to how the autonomic nervous system creates stability. The warm-first approach ensures peripheral vasodilation. Warmth opens everything up, right? It distributes blood evenly to your extremities and puts you in a state of parasympathetic dominance. That's your rest and digest mode.
Okay, so you open the pipes first. You make sure the blood is everywhere.
Right. Then, when you apply the cold, you get a safe, unified vascular contraction. It acts as a functional closure. You go from fully open to neatly closed. It synchronizes the rhythm. But if you reverse it, if you freeze yourself, clamping everything down and then immediately heat up, you cause autonomic desynchronization.
You're just confusing the system.
You are. The source describes it as causing heat shock-like reactions. You're forcing the vessels to dilate when they're in a shock state. It creates a chaotic signal, not a rhythmic one.
That is a massive takeaway. From anyone listening, sequence matters more than intensity. If you're doing contrast therapy, you have to end on cold.
Always end on cold. It provides rhythmic consolidation. You want to seal the system, not leave it all confused and dilated. And there's another point here about adaptation that really struck me. We tend to think that if we do this every day, we get better circulation, meaning we're building bigger pipes or something.
Right, like lifting weights for your veins. Bigger biceps, better veins.
But the source corrects this. It says blood flow doesn't necessarily increase in volume. Instead, it stops hesitating.
It stops hesitating. That's a really poetic way to describe blood flow.
It's functional. It means your autonomic system learns to switch gears instantly. When you hit the cold, there's no lag, no panic, no chaotic flutter in the heart rate. You're removing hesitation from the biological machinery. You become efficient, not just strong.
So the goal isn't to pump more blood, it's to have a system that reacts instantly to the environment without buffering. Okay, so we've got the neural hijack silencing the mind by overwhelming it, and the vascular reset removing hesitation from the blood flow. But here's where it gets really interesting for me, and maybe a little uncomfortable for the diehards. We need to talk about the psychology of more.
Ah, yes. The trap of contrast.
I just feel like there's this built-in escalation in the community. If 2 minutes is good, 5 is better. If 50 degrees is good, 34 is better. If ice is good, a frozen lake is better. Why do we feel this need to keep pushing the needle?
This is a fascinating look at human behavior. The source argues that we aren't addicted to the cold itself. We're addicted to the contrast.
The difference between the pain and the relief.
Exactly. I mean, think about why these austerity practices, fasting, ice baths, feel good. They work by creating an intense contrast. They temporarily halt that self-referential activity, the me story.
Right.
When you are freezing, the me story stops because the it is cold story takes over completely. When you get out, you feel this massive flood of relief.
It's the old joke. Why are you hitting yourself with a hammer? Because it feels so good when I stop.
It's not far off. The relief is chemical. It's dopamine, it's opioids. But here's the problem. The body is an adaptation machine. Over time, that shock wears off. The water doesn't feel as cold, the contrast fades.
So the high isn't as high anymore. You plateau.
Right. And practitioners misinterpret this neutrality as stagnation. They think, oh no, it's not working anymore, I've lost my edge. So what do?
They buy a bigger freezer, they stay in until they go numb, they escalate.
They chase the magnitude of the difference rather than the quality of the state. They become dependent on that contrast just to feel okay. It becomes a dependency loop.
That is such a subtle trap. You're essentially using the stress to medicate your inability to be still. If you can't be quiet without a shock, you aren't actually quiet, you're just stunned.
Precisely. And the source connects this to breath work too, which is so often paired with cold plunging, specifically the superventilation styles.
Oh, interesting. Like Wim Hof, I thought those were the gold standard. You breathe heavy, charge up, get in the ice.
In popular culture, they're inseparable. But the source draws a sharp distinction here. It argues that forced hyperventilation and breath retention create arousal. It activates the sympathetic nervous system, your fight or flight.
Because you're pumping yourself full of oxygen and adrenaline, you're getting hyped.
Yes, and if your goal is just to feel a buzz, fine. But if your goal is quiet stability, or what the source calls PNSE, persistent non-symbolic experience, then hyperventilation is directionally opposite. You are revving the engine when you should be learning how to idle.
So for someone who's already stable, that kind of breath work, it just adds noise.
It adds state.
Yeah.
It creates a temporary altered state rather than settling into a permanent stable baseline. It's adding waves to a lake you're trying to smooth out.
So we're escalating the cold, we're hyperventilating for a buzz, and we're posting photos to show how tough we are. This brings us to the warrior mindset. The source seems to think this identity building is actually a roadblock.
This is what it calls the critical fork in the road. It outlines two paths, the majority path and the minority path.
Walk us through the majority path. I have a feeling I know this one because I see it on my feed every single day.
The majority path is what we see on Instagram. The experience itself is valued. You form an identity around endurance. I survived this. I am the kind of person who does hard things. I am a warrior. Because you value the struggle, you have to keep increasing the intensity to maintain the struggle.
You need the struggle to validate the identity. If it gets easy, you aren't a warrior anymore.
Correct. But then there's the minority path. On this path, the experience is seen as nothing special. No identity is formed around it. The stimulus, the cold water, it just loses its relevance.
It's nothing special. That sounds almost disappointing. If I'm doing something that hard, I want it to be special.
It's only disappointing to the ego. The ego wants a medal. But neurologically, it's profound. This is where the source distinguishes between endurance and neutral tolerance.
I really want to drill down on this because they sound similar. You're sitting in cold water either way, but the source says the internal state is worlds apart.
Worlds apart. Think about endurance. In endurance, aversion exists. You don't like the cold? You are telling yourself a story. I can do this, just hold on, breathe through it 30 more seconds. There's a you that is overcoming the cold.
So there's a conflict happening. Me versus the ice. It's a boxing match.
Exactly. It's a battle. And winning feels good. Now contract that with neutral tolerance. In this state, there's no aversion. There is no narrative. The stimulus passes through the system without engaging the identity. You're doing it simply because it's fine.
Doing it because it's fine. That's the subtitle of the document, isn't it?
It is. And that is the key. In neutral tolerance, you aren't fighting. You aren't overcoming. You are just residing in a state where the temperature of the water doesn't trigger a me response.
That completely flips the script on the whole toughen up mentality. Toughening up implies you're building a callus, a shield. This sounds more like you're becoming transparent to the cold.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Transparent to the stimulus. If you're transparent, there's nothing for the cold to hit. And this leads to the logical conclusion of the argument, which is honestly the part that surprised me the most.
What's that?
If you get good enough at this, you should essentially stop doing it.
Wait, really? The goal of the practice is to quit the practice?
In a sense, yes. Or at least the practice aspect dissolves. The source discusses state residency. When your baseline arousal becomes stable and your blood rhythm is uniform, cold exposure just stops producing change. There's no post-cold buzz because you're already there.
So if I jump in an ice bath and I feel nothing, just cold water, that means I've won.
According to this source, yes. And it's crucial to distinguish this from numbness. The source compares numbness to quiet stability. Numbness is bad. That's reduced sensory input, dissociation, slow recovery. You've shut down.
You've checked out. You're hiding from the cold.
Right. But quiet stability means your sensory input is fully intact. You feel the cold vividly. But the reaction is optional. Your recovery is immediate. You don't shiver for an hour afterwards.
Reaction is optional.
Yeah.
That's a superpower that applies to way more than just ice baths.
Of course.
Traffic, arguments, emails.
It creates a global stability. And that's where the source references the Tibetan context, specifically Tummo practices, the internal fire meditation.
The monks sitting in the snow drying wet sheets with their body heat. That always seemed like a magic trick to me.
It looks like magic, or some feat of extreme endurance. But the source points out that the true practitioners aren't enduring the cold to show off. They aren't sitting there thinking, look how tough I am. They're operating in a state where the cold is simply irrelevant.
It's not about fighting the cold. It's about the cold not mattering.
Exactly. And once it doesn't matter, You don't need the ritual to prove it doesn't matter. The source notes that in this state there's no conquest narrative, there's no story to tell. And because there's no story, this state often just leaves no records.
That is wild to think about. We always hear about the struggle, the hero's journey, the Rocky montage, but nobody writes a book about the guy who sat in the ice, felt okay, and then just went about his day.
Because there is no hero in that story. The identity has dissolved. The need for validation has dissolved. You don't need to post it on Instagram because there was no battle to win.
So let's bring this back for the listener, because I'm guessing most people listening aren't trying to achieve Tibetan enlightenment today, but they might have a cold shower routine or a plunge tank. What's the practical application here?
I think the summary is that the real victory isn't in how long you stay in the ice or how cold you get it. The victory is reaching a point when you don't need the ice to quiet your mind.
The ice is just a tool.
It's a specific tool for stopping unstable systems. The source's integrated definition is that cold exposure is a brake. It slams the brakes on a racing mind and a chaotic vascular system. But quiet stability is a state where you don't need to slam on the brakes anymore.
Because the car isn't speeding out of control. I love that. If you're constantly slamming the brakes, you're not a good driver. It just means you're constantly speeding.
Precisely. Progress isn't about adding more discipline. It's not about finding harder things to do. As the source concludes, progress occurred not because of effort, but because reactions ceased to be used as identity material.
Reactions cease to be used as identity material. That is a sentence worth pausing on.
It means you stopped using your struggle to define who you are.
That is a heavy thought to leave on. It really makes you question the whole hustle and grind culture of self-improvement. It asks us to look at our struggles and ask, are these actually building me up?
Or are you just addicted to the feeling of overcoming them?
Are you building a house, or are you just addicted to carrying bricks back and forth?
That's the question.
Well, that is definitely something to chew on next time you're shivering in the shower. We'll leave you with that thought. Thanks for diving in with us.
A pleasure as always.